Hello, I think we're live. First of all, welcome. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Russell. I'm part of for Chits and Giggles, and today I'm very pleased to be joined by the legendary game designer who's been in the industry for a while. His name is Rob Daviau. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Yes, I've reached legendary status. It's like
What's
20th level.
Yeah, what's that like? Was there some sort of like party when you get to that?
No, you just allocate experience points to skills. It's really not much.
First question. As you know, this show is called Tea and a Chit Chat. I have to ask, what tea are you drinking?
I have to answer coffee. And it's not just because I'm an American. About 10 years ago, tea started hurting my stomach, even the smell of it,
Re-
which is weird. I don't know if it's the tannins, but I drink red wine. But yeah, I find it really off, which is sad because I used to enjoy it. So I'm drinking coffee, but I put it in a Beatles mug to try to keep the British
Nice. And
feeling.
I know that last stream we were supposed to have, which got postponed. You actually had a scone prepared, which was quite impressive.
Yes, it was more happenstance than scheduling. I had made scones because I had some cream and some huckleberry jam I wanted to try, and it was the end of May and it was warm, and so I made some proper scones, and it just happened to be the day before we were scheduled to do it.
Oh
So
wow! So that's
put it together.
kismet almost, but obviously not so much because it didn't end up happening in the end. But you did.
Well, because I can't tell time.
I think
So
that was definitely not just your fault. I think there was definitely confusion in the time zones. I mean, I'm not really sure why. I'm not sure we should be having like summertime daylight saving times this day and age anyway. But that's a whole other conversation. And obviously, I'm pretty
yeah.
sure people want to hear more about board games. So let's talk about. You have obviously a long history in board gaming. Do you remember the first time you ever played a board game?
Not particularly. I had a bunch of childhood games that stuck around through my childhood. I'm the oldest of lived up. But I have this vague memory of playing it. Bingo, probably Candyland. I do remember Shoots and Ladders.
So you played like the atypical kind of kids games as well.
Yeah, no, my mom is sort of a very casual gamer, more cards, more light games. They didn't have Avalon Hill games at the house or
Yeah, that
tabletop miniatures or anything. I was the outlier in my family. Still,
I should mention, by the way, obviously one of the things that's going on in the world. I know I should have mentioned at the start, so I apologize. A lot of things happening in the world right now. I'm trying to do my small bit, which is to fundraise. So any subscriptions that I get from this channel today, any donations, if you want to donate, you can donate by contributing bits. I think is the sort of Twitch currency. Everything that I raise this month will be going towards fundraising towards Black Lives Matter movement. I'll be donating all of it to Act Blue, which kind of distributes that amongst many needed charities. So yeah, please, if you are interested in donating and doing a small bit, please do that. So yeah, sorry to kind of interrupt you on that, but I did mention.
Thank you for doing something
I
to
mean,
help. The world needs a lot of help.
I
These
agree.
days.
I mean, there is obviously a whole manner of topics we could discuss about that, but I do want to leave those discussions to the people who should be leading those discussions. I don't feel like I'm right to do that. I do want to contribute and uplift those people's whose voices, and I am trying to get some really great guests who are able to sort of lead those discussions on the channel. So yeah, just so I'm not sort of like ignoring the elephant in the room. But yeah, anyway, sorry, just to go back to board games, we will invite questions from the audience, by the way, as well. So if you do want to ask Rob a question, feel free to write it in the chat, tweet it to me, or even write it in like any other way you can, and we'll get those to him at the end of the stream. So let's go back to games. You obviously talked about playing some games in your childhood, which is really, really unsurprising because a lot of us did that. But what was it that sort of ticked you into doing this as a living? Was it purposeful or was it accidental?
It was a little of both. The thing that made me a gamer was actually Dungeons and Dragons in 1981.
Oh wow, okay.
I went off to summer camp. and sort of discovered D&D. Some people were playing without books or dice. They were doing like just storytelling. What is this? And they were telling me about it. And I sort of joined in. It was a walking campaign, right? In the summer camp, and like the DM told you stories and you got to interact. And I was immediately hooked. And there was a group playing with proper dice and a DM screen. And I came home and I bought the books, and that just ignited a love for game design, storytelling, world building that really hasn't gone away.
So you mentioned, because obviously RPGs and board games, they're quite different worlds, in my opinion. And I feel like you can be very much involved in one without being so much involved in the other. So obviously you started in the RPG scene. What was it that kind of ticked you over towards board games? Because I'd say you are more known for board game.
I am, and I've done a little expansion for kids on bikes and things, but role-playing games are what I play in my free time as a hobby, because they're not monetized. I don't think about the business. I don't think about word count, and I just play them as a game player. Any board game I play, I start thinking about, like, well, what's the card stock here, or what's the graphics, or if I'm not liking it, I think how to make it better. If I do like it, I get quietly jealous that I didn't make it right. Like, there's all sorts of complications around board games, but role-playing games are pure entertainment. And I actually, in 1998, planned on doing role-playing writing like one day a week, not really for money, because there's often not a lot of money in it, like board games. And it's a long story and we don't have time for it, and I've told it elsewhere, but sort of answered an ad in the newspaper that Hasbro, Parker Brothers, Milton Bradley was hiring a copywriter, and I was an advertising copywriter, and sort of applied to that job, and ended up as a writer in the game design department, and ended up as a game designer. And I had a lot of overlapping experience. I did play a lot of board games. It wasn't extensively role-playing games, but I had a knowledge of Star Wars, and Episode 1 was coming out the next year. I knew Trivial Pursuit. I understood all the maths behind it. And they're mostly hiring me as a writer who could do some game design. And then within a month I was there, I'm like, guys, I'm a game designer who can write. Like, let's just swap this around. But my title was writer designer.
Wow.
For like 3 years at Hasbro, until we got it to be dropped and be game designer. So yeah, it was. And you look, I'm making a lot of role playing games in board game form, right? Like the legacy games and Betrayal at House on the Hill, and a lot of the games I do are very narratively driven. I don't think I could make a mid to heavyweight Euro that would be good. I could make a very competent one after 22 years of making games, and that's why you don't see me making, because I don't have a passion for it.
Have you ever been asked to do a game that's outside your wheelhouse and said, well, in that case, like, have you ever been asked to do a mid to heavyweight Euro and you've said, I can't do it justice?
No, I mean, there have been publishers in Europe said, if you have a game you'd like to show us, we'd love to look at it, but I know the games they want to publish, and I'm just not making them. And I sort of, for my whole independent career outside of Hasbro, which is 7-8 years now, have ended up in a place where usually I have a workload that's already filled. I rarely have time to just come up with a game and then try to shop it. It's always been backwards, where a publisher and I find a project to work on, and then I design to that. So I don't often just have games that I have an idea. I'm just going to spend a week or two seeing if there's something here and then trying to shop it. I'd like to get more that way. But then I co-founded Restoration Games a couple years ago, and now I'm a full-time publisher and a designer and creative director over there. So I sort of turned 50 and became a grown-up, spending a lot of time talking about schedules and budgets.
I mean, that's obviously probably the sort of like unknown part of games design. We talked to many people on this channel, on this sort of like stream before, and spreadsheeting and all that kind of stuff is a big part of games. It's not the fun part, but obviously you get to do the fun part as well, and that must really make. Sorry, change slightly, but obviously I'd say, are one of the few people who've had like quite a huge impact on gaming, because you've been in the industry a long time, but you've also probably had the biggest impact on most recent gaming in Legacy, and that's like quite an achievement.
And it feels weird. I hear that, I go, I don't think so. I made a couple games, and a lot of people make it. It just feels weird because I'm sitting in the same room working in the same way that I did 8 years ago, and I'm just making stuff that seems interesting to me.
But I think, you can't deny that even even after you created sort of the legacy element in gaming, people who make their own, they will still come to you. Is that correct?
Not everyone,
But
right? Like there's Clank Legacy, which I haven't gotten around to yet because it's hard during a pandemic to have people on a regular
yeah,
basis to play it. But I know nothing about that. Other people have gotten on a quick call with me to ask me a question. I'm like, sure. And we get on for an hour and I talk about things because, not to get really in the weeds here, but one of the hidden design challenges in a legacy game is production, not design, because a lot of the cost of a legacy game is hiding things or scratch cards or stickers that take labor.
yes.
And you don't see when you pick up a box, wow, there's a lot of labor in here. Therefore, this justifies the price, but it's a price that adds to the cost of the game. So making things actually affordable and that you're not wasting 70% of what you put in the box because the publisher doesn't want to pay for that and the designer doesn't want to design that, and the player doesn't want to throw that much away. So there's all these subtleties to it to make you, that is probably a topic for another
I'm
time.
actually fascinated by that. No, genuinely, because I do. I've often had this thought with legacy games because they do err on the expensive side, but that is because there is added costs, as you said, with having to make the game. That is often a lot of like throwaway elements, and that's part of the fun of games.
It's the throwaway elements, but it's also every time there's an envelope to open or a box to open, chances are that you paid someone to put that stuff into that box.
Yeah.
So if you have 10 boxes to open, you had 10 people doing very specific work before the game even went down the assembly line, and that just takes people hours, and people hours get charged. And then when you're designing the game, it's going to be packed out by people who don't, let's say you're doing in English, who don't speak English. So all of the components need to be keyed so that the wrong things don't end up in the wrong place. And if you're having cards that have to come out in a certain order, you need a quality check to make sure that the decks actually are in the right order. And all of that gets baked into the cost to the consumer because it was like the bespoke handwork to sort of put together this experience as opposed to here's a brick of cards and here's a bag of plastic pieces. But again, the consumer just sees the price. Why is that an extra $10?
No, that's
yeah.
Why.
I
mean, and I'm obviously knowing that, which is great, and it's kind of a shame that you don't get enough space or sort of you don't get to share that kind of knowledge with people, because obviously that would make things a lot more understandable for people when there are concerns with price. And to go past that, I've always thought of legacy gaming as good value for money, because despite the higher price, I am way more incentivized to play a legacy game than I would with a normal game, just because I want an ending. Like I might be sort of in the minority here, but when I'm playing a game, especially a game with a narrative, I want like that conclusion, and I don't mind. I actually prefer that conclusion to be reached through decisions that I've made and over a longer period of time. And that's why I didn't necessarily get along with the game like Tales of Arabian Nights, because it just felt like you are still telling a story, but at the end of the game, it's just like it just feels a bit random and there's no like structure to it.
It is. I have to say, not this birthday, the last birthday, my gaming group got together, and that's the game I chose to play. And I said, we won't finish this, not by the rules. And the game is going to play you, but it is going to crack us up because someone is going to become a sultan basically within 3 turns, and someone's going to be like a beggar with some horrible, debilitating illness. And you didn't do anything wrong. That's just what happened. And that's exactly what happened. We were just sort of laughing. It just dynamically creates interesting characters and scenarios that has nothing to do with playing a good, proper board game.
Yeah, so I mean it's why I really like legacy games, because I feel like I say that I've got Gloomhaven over there with I'm still probably like a couple of years away from finishing that game, but it's definitely at the top of the list. Any legacy game would be at the top of the list when it comes to meeting up with the group, because I like that. I like being able to refer back to, oh, remember what happened last time and here's what's happened next. I mean, I'm still not quite finished Pandemic Legacy Season 2 either, but please don't hate me for that.
I look, they're a commitment, and one thing that the third game is coming out this year.
Cool.
We've had some delays, both because of production, where we were talking about, and more importantly, COVID. So we don't have the exact date, so we haven't going to announce and talk in detail, but it is coming out this year. And one thing Matt and I have tried to do is put fewer games in the box, right? Because of season 1 and season 2, you're going to play probably 15 to 17 games. And we tried to get this one down to 12 to 15 games by redoing things. Because we recognize a lot of people say, I started, I really like it. And then we just missed a couple weeks with the gaming group and then the momentum dropped. So, that's one of the things when I did Risk Legacy like 10 years ago now.
Wow.
Is I had finished it 10 years ago, but it wasn't out yet. I wanted a number of games in there that felt like you got your money's worth and people wouldn't say it was disposable, even though I knew they would. And the first couple of games of Risk that game were very short, where you could play 2 or 3. So I picked 15, and it was a number that felt right with all of those metrics, but it sort of created an artificial benchmark that's like the number of games you need to have. And I've heard a number of people say, I love them, I want them, but can you give me 6 or 8? And so like Machi Core Legacy is it's either 10 or 12, I can't remember now. So try to bring that number down a bit. And Betrayal Legacy, which came out last year, and if you like Betrayal at House on the Hill, I think you like it. And if you don't like it, we did clean up a number of the wiggly bits in that system. There are 14 games, but the first 3 are very fast, 3 or 4.
In Legacy, right? In Betrayal Legacy. Yeah.
And Betrayal, yeah.
That's a game I haven't got round to, but I did. I think I asked you about this on Twitter because Geek and Sundry did basically a whole playthrough of the entire Legacy. Obviously, I understand there's elements of it is replayable because you'll have a sort of different decisions that you make and different items that come up, etc. At least I believe. I haven't played it, but I only watched the first one because I felt like, oh, that's quite interesting. They are going to do the whole thing. But obviously, it's for me. It's spoiler territory. Like I intend to play that game.
It is spoiler territory, especially we spoil you right from the beginning. The thing about Betrayal Legacy is there's 50 haunts plus a Easter egg haunt. You are only going to play 14 in the game. 3 of those have to do only with the campaign, and you won't play them again. So you will have played 13 out of 50 by the end. You'll have a custom deck and a custom game. So you won't have seen, 37 of the haunts. And so my family early in quarantine, my daughter was with us. She's at university, but she was back home. And we played the whole campaign, and then we played 8 or 10 times after it. And then we sort of wandered away because we did that in 2 weeks. Like It was just like every night was like 2 or 3 games. Just as like, there's a pandemic, right? And so we were just murdering each other. But it was quite enjoyable to sort of play through the whole thing and then see some of these after campaign haunts, which I had play tested but had never seen.
So you did play, but you didn't see them being played live. So how is that when you see? I mean, how do you feel when you see people playing your games? Like, are you kind of nervous at any when you're watching people playing your own games?
Yeah, not really. It depends. Like if I see them playing at a convention, right, and they look like they're having a good time, I'll kind of watch like, hey, that thing I did a couple years ago, people are enjoying it. This is why you do this, Rob, right? Because there's no feedback loop for being a game designer. It's much like being an author. You do it, you send it out, you finish, and then 6 to 24 months later, people buy it, and maybe you read something about it. But that's always fraught with peril because you're like, hey, the game came out, and you read the first couple of reviews, and one person says something they didn't like, which just happens, and it's fine. You're like, oh, but I tried. So it's the same thing in person. You can usually read the body language or something. And then if I see them, they keep picking up the rule book. Sometimes, but not always. Like I go over and I'm like, hi, I designed this. Do you need help? Like I want you to have a good time. And most of the time they're very grateful. And occasionally like, no, good. We're fine. Get away from here.
I actually, because I mentioned spoilers earlier on, but I think that's another legacy that you've given in games is games with spoilers. I don't think that happened before. Sure. So I have very strong feelings about spoilers. I won't even watch a trailer for a film if I'm going to watch.
A lot of them now are the whole movie. Like they show you a trailer, you're like, I don't know why I need to see the movie. I get everything I need.
There's actually a couple of trailers which are the worst for spoiling movies, and I can say the name of the films without telling you what happens. But there's a really very, I say trash film, but it's probably not. It's very low rated film called Obsessed. Basically, the trailer was literally point by point the whole story of the entire film. And there was another. Did you ever see Flight Plan with Jodie Foster?
No, I remember it, but if I saw it, I don't.
That trailer was the worst. It negated the first half of the entire film. Like the whole first half is like suspense about whether something or something didn't happen. Just completely mitigates it. So having. So do you feel? How do you feel about spoilers in general?
I mean, I try to avoid them, and I certainly don't say them. There's even now I'll talk elliptically about, Pandemic Legacy Season 1, which came out 5 years ago, because there's still, I get I'm like, oh, we sold some more. Some people haven't played it. So I don't want to spoil it for anyone that's out there. And it is weird to be in a position where I took narrative from television or comic books and put it into the board game form. But yeah, the Legacy was a combination of role-playing, comic books. The TV show Lost was on at the time. It was sort of in the middle of its run towards the end. And I'm like, man, I love this, like cliffhangers and come back next week and see what happens and things like that. Just kind of mashed together and say, could all these different things that are sort of hallmarks of narrative storytelling in different mediums, could that work in the board game space?
So, I think it's great. I think, by the way, Scoop, who's watching, says Risk Legacies his all-time favorite Legacy game, a great experience. So there we go.
Oh, thank you very much. That one is different. That was a proof of concept, and there's some stuff in there that's looser and wackier than later. Like there isn't a defined narrative. It was like, I don't know, and then this happens, and then like, would this work? Would that work? Like, let's put this under the back tray. Let's do this. Let's just open an envelope, and who knows what happens. And I was like trying to figure out like what the pieces were to this genre. And I think there's sort of a delightful playfulness.
Do you think?
To Risk
Do
Legacy.
You almost think of that game as like, in that case, do you feel it's unfinished, or at least not in its final version? Do you think if you were to do it again, you would do it like, you would do it?
No, I'm not going to George Lucas it, right? Like that represents me and my ideas in a time and space. And every game designer or creator can look back after the fact and say, that I was under deadline, or I talked myself into that being a good idea, or I really thought it was a good idea, but now that I've seen people experience it, I realized I made an assumption that was wrong. And we'd love to take certain things back and do it again, but you can just kind of go down the road to madness to, constantly looking for perfection, because there's no such thing as perfection.
Correct.
Like anyone who makes something tried as hard as they could in the time that they had, and then you just release it and try something new, which isn't to say if a game is reprinted, I won't say like, oh, there was a typo or we missed this. Like if Betrayal Legacy has a second print run there, the nature of those haunts are so much, and we kind of scraped together and said this should change and that should tweak, but it's just this fine tuning stuff. And there's stuff about that game that I would change, especially having played it through. Right now that I played through recently, I'm like, I would have changed a bunch of stuff. I still like it, but
it kind of reminds me. There's the a game I played last Christmas for the first time was Snowdonia by is it Tony Boydell? I think. Anyway, I'm not sure, but they released a master set, and it was like the deluxe, everything they'd ever created for this game, and they put everything in, but they included the original typos and stuff. I mean, this was something I was told to me. I'm not 100% verified it. But I was like, oh, that's quite interesting to have that thought process as like, well, that's the way it was, so that's the way it's got to be for the rest of the time, because otherwise it's not quite the same. But I get what you're saying as well, like to find to...
Yeah, typos is, like little tiny things that you'd like, oh, this wasn't clear, or we left a rule out, like a word out. And like that stuff I would clean up. And if someone came back and said, look, we want to remake this game, but we didn't like this part, would you revisit it? I'd be like, well, sure, I'll revisit it. But I'm not driven to every game that I make, get it off the shelf and be like, I want to change it, I want to change it, I want to change it. Yeah, at some level I do, but I also want to make new stuff and not keep trying to achieve this perfection, that there was nothing wrong and you couldn't change a thing, because I just don't think it's attainable.
I mean, I think if you ended up doing that, got stuck down sort of that rabbit hole, you would have not created some of the other really great games that you've done. So
yeah, and sometimes I miss. I mean, there are people who really like Seafall, but overall, a lot of people played it coming out of Pandemic Legacy and expected it to be like that, or was the wrong audience, or there's some, we rushed some things, and I'd love to do that one over. and take it back like after it came out. I very much after reflection say like, oh, I see where I made assumptions or where things went wrong and why it wasn't received, and it didn't feel good. Every once in a while, you need your teeth kicked in just to remind you what it feels like. Not literally, so that's one I might take pieces of that and redo and turn into something else. But then I go, I don't know if anyone wants that. I'm like, why'd you redo this? Because I feel like that one didn't live up to what was in my head.
I have a question, a very direct question. Should people open that hidden envelope in Risk Legacy?
I don't know. I told you not to. And actually, here's the reason. I was very smart 10 years ago. There are 4 different things that could be in that envelope, and one of which is, yeah, you should definitely open it.
Oh, wow. So
1 is definitely you shouldn't, and 2 are kind of a mixed bag.
Oh.
And sometimes the envelope only affects people who are there when it's opened, and other players who play aren't affected, and sometimes it affects the world. And I did that, so I could, 10 years later, go, I don't know.
Wow. So you're saying that I've got a copy of Risk Legacy and we haven't opened that. So you're saying if I do open that, I might not get the same thing as somebody else?
No, there's 4 different ones. They're randomly sorted.
That's brilliant. It's clever.
Because what I didn't want people to do, I wanted it to be, it's a psycho. You know what it is? It's the lever in a dungeon in classic D&D, which is just a lever or a video game. You're like, well, I'm going to pull that. And if it says do not pull this lever, you'll want to pull it more. And it doesn't matter if you are running a game or an escape room and you put a lever and says do not pull it. It's not if, it's just when and who is going to pull the lever, because the unknown is going to kill them. And that envelope, for those who don't know, there's an envelope under the Bactrian Risk Legacy tape there. It says do not open ever, as opposed to open when, like the other envelopes. That came out of a joke I was making, that I was going to put an envelope in the game that says open when instructed and then not put any instructions. But that was a joke, and it would have been mean. But people kept asking about it. And then I realized people weren't going to want to destroy cards, so they were going to want to just store them. So they were going to pick up the back tray. So they've already sort of...
so genius.
I don't want to say failed the test, but basically like, look, you're not committing to what we're trying to do here because you're trying to stuff cards under here. So I'm going to up the ante and now give you something that is even worse than you would have had if you had just followed the instructions. Then I thought of doing 4 different things so that I had plausible deniability. Or even if you're like, uh-oh, tell you what, I'll just Google it. And then you would Google it, and then you'd find out there's 4 different ones, and it puts you right back in the space you were before.
I can't get over how clever that is. That whole scenario, amazing work.
So it's basically, and I've seen some fascinating stuff where groups never open it. They open it right away. They vote. As soon as the person who wins the campaign can decide, as soon as every other envelope's been open, if someone rolls like 3 6s and someone rolls 2 6s, like there's been all sorts of weird cultural beliefs at each table that popped up, which I have just been delighted, and thank you all for doing it. But what I've not seen a group do is open the envelope, look at it, and go, yeah, we don't really like that.
Oh, so it's...
And just throw it away. It's like people feel like, well, it said don't open it, and we opened it, and we hate what happened, but got to do it because we said so.
It's our fault. Like we ignored the instructions.
But it's your fault. But it's like it's just a game. If you're like, this is going to make the game less fun, don't use it. But everyone, it's this incredible compulsion because you broke the rules and you did a taboo.
It's sort of like your punishment for breaking the rules, right?
Yeah, it's your punishment for breaking the rules. Like,
so let's talk about like, because obviously that's a good moment. Have you got a memorable moment where you've had like incredibly like positive feedback, or a moment you experienced involving one of your games, maybe watching somebody play it, or even just a reaction to something that happened in a game where you've been like, wow, that is like one of my highlights in this industry?
Yeah, it's actually never something that I have seen, but I have had 3 different people come up to me in the past 5 years and tell me in confidence that playing Pandemic Legacy saved their marriage.
Wow.
Yeah, 3. That it was I forget, it was a mix of different husbands or wives who said that they had been struggling.
As long as it wasn't the same guy each time.
Nope. I remember it was three different ones, and they said that they and their spouse were having trouble communicating and just weren't around, and they started playing it, just the 2 of them, and over the course of 16 games, they rediscovered how to put their needs second and how to communicate. and they laughed and shared a common goal, and they just sort of like rekindled what had been in their marriage and like brought it back from a place where they had been drifting apart. And let me tell you, that is the most successful accomplishment or award I will ever get out of anything I've ever made, is knowing that even one, let alone three, made a difference. And even if they're exaggerating, even if it was just a tiny catalyst and it didn't save it, it was just a nice moment. I'll take that all day long. That is not something you get into this industry, with a goal. And so the fact that something that I make for just entertainment had some deeper meaning is very meaningful.
Well, that is impactful. I mean, that's a great achievement on your part, to be fair. Yeah. Have you ever been upset or wished more people had the way I worded this is because which game of yours do you wish more people had heard of or got more excited by?
That is hard to say. I mean, there's a lot of games that come out. And games can get buzz, but not have a lot of sales. Games can get sales, but not a lot of buzz. I don't know. Everyone is just a little bit different. Like you look at the sales numbers and you're like, oh, I expected that to do better. And then you look at other ones, you're like, wow, that did much better than I thought. And it's like, if I knew why, I would just make, wildly successful games all the time. And which isn't to say I haven't had successful games. I can pay my bills. I can't retire. But I think it's interesting that Betrayal Legacy, which I talked before, I had a active hand doing some design and development work on the original Betrayal, and I have a very a fondness for it. I recognize why it's not for the board game geek crowd. It's wildly swingy. It can go off the rails. And then when Betrayal Legacy came out, it got almost no attention on BGG. The sales, because it just lived outside of it. So it was the type of thing that it just sort of, people are coming up like, oh yeah, that came out. Like, sorry, it didn't seem to do anything. I'm like, no, it sold quite well. It's just like different audiences and things like that. But there was probably some games at Hasbro that I worked on that I thought were going to do better and didn't, but I'm getting older and I have to think back not to last decade, but 2 decades ago to realize what they were. So I'll put that in the back of my head and I'll shout out a random game or something, hopefully before the end of the hour.
I mean, no pressure. I just like to think about that kind of thing because it would obviously have no history of that, and you obviously have a lot of history. So I wonder if that was something that kind of you thought about a lot, like a retrospective kind of thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I try to learn from my mistakes and learn from my successes and try to put new metrics as you're making a game and say, well, hold on, I did this and this didn't work out. And then you have to ask yourself, well, did it not work out for the reason we're talking about or some unrelated reason? Like, I think it's a natural tendency, and I've seen it in younger designers, and I've said it myself for a long time, when players are playtesting a game and they're not playing well, or they're complaining about something, and I'd be like, well, just play better and the game's fun. And, because you worked hard and you're like, you're just not playing it right. Well, in today's world, people aren't going to play a game 15 times to gain mastery to play it well enough to find the fun. They're going to make some snap judgments. And if your game isn't intuitive, or you aren't like, oh, I lost, but that was fun and I saw why. If you're just struggling to understand what's going on and what's happening, it's not that they're not playing right. It's that you're not designing a game for 2020 and the current audience. You're designing a game for people who played 20, 30 years ago when there were fewer games and people were willing to do a deeper dive into them.
They didn't have so many kind of flashy, shiny new things that distract them.
They had different shiny things, but yeah.
I definitely...
It's just play a game once, move on. 3 times if you
I feel like a good example of that is I played one of the Brass games. I want to say Birmingham, and I'm not sure. Played Brass Birmingham, the new edition. I got through almost the whole game, not really knowing what I was doing, looking at trying to figure out sort of my strategy, only realizing what I was kind of working towards very close to the end of the game. I did win, which probably did kind of changed my mind a little bit, but I was like, I had no idea what was going on there, but I was interested in it, and I definitely want to play that again. Like those.
Yeah, that's a fascinating story of you weren't sure what was going on and you
Yeah. Oh
won.
yeah. And I think
So at some level, you must have been aware of what you do on a turn.
Oh yeah, so structurally, yes, I knew what I had to do in terms of like I have to do this to play a card and then do the thing. But there was so many bits that didn't feel quite intuitive, and I think possibly the only reason I won was because I grasped it just slightly more than the other players.
Sure.
But
You
yeah,
get the most mastery
yeah,
at the time.
exactly. But I really wanted to play it again. So it's funny because I think that with games design, it almost feels like you're trying to sort of bottle like a magic ingredient. Um, I think there are certain things, obviously, that I mean, this is just my perspective. Again, you could say, no, that's totally not how it works. But I feel like with certainly some things, from your experience and from designing lots of games, okay, these are the kind of things that work. There's certain metrics you can measure, like what people enjoy, what things people are after when they're playing a game. But I almost feel like there's almost a mystery, magical element to it, which if you get it right, if you put it in the game, that's it. You've created a
Yep.
magical, awesome game. But something without that could then easily be sort of lost, or I don't know. That's just a bit random thought.
I think the mystery ingredient you're talking about is actually the removal of all the things that get in the way. Usually you don't win by adding something. Usually you're like, okay, we're working on a game that's not announced for restoration right now. We're like, this is great. This is working fairly well. It's a solid B, B minus. It's not an A. Let's start taking stuff out until it gets better or it gets worse. And we took some stuff out. It got worse. Like, okay, don't take those things out. Right. And then like streamline this. And it's like, yeah, that shaves some time off the game, but it took some agency and decision away. So that's not right. And so you're like moving these pieces around. And I think one of the things that I'm good at, and I don't usually talk about what I'm good at because I still feel like I'm learning very much in this, but I am just tenacious of not good enough, not good enough, not good enough. And there's a lot of games I think that I have on a prototypes I have on a shelf behind me that other people would think are done. And I'm like, it's fine. It'll get lost.
That's
right. It'll come out and people will go, okay.
Well, I mean, that's certainly like an invaluable skill, and maybe that's the reason why you are making a living doing this, because you have that ability. And I think, I often think that might be too easy for somebody to say, yes, this is like a good game, but games need to be great these days to stand out.
Yeah, or you need to try. You need to say, this is pretty good. Can we make it better? And then at some point, a lot of times it's the question that you have to ask when you're doing game design. And I have a couple people at Restoration who work with me, designers, and I'm often saying, what's the problem we're trying to solve? We're talking about all sorts of add this and do this, or what if it's an auction, or it's open hand, or these are public, and we're like, what are we trying to solve? What is the thing that's not fun that we're trying to solve? Because it's very easy to get crunchy and talk about solutions and talk yourself into a solution that just sounds cool, but doesn't at all solve the problem that you were talking about 45 minutes ago. So it's regularly going back to that, or, yeah, that's a great solution and it solves it 100%, but it's going to be very hard to understand. So now we need a solution that solves it at 90%, but is 5 times easier to understand.
Well, that's probably some of the toughest work you have to do as a games designer, isn't it? Like just kind of figuring out those specifics, like the solution.
Well, that's the fun part.
Okay. Well, it's also more difficult.
That to me is the beginning of a game where everything works and everything's fun. That's the fun part. And then you have this drop down where nothing worked at all like you thought it would.
And you have to...
Right. And you're like, why did we even think of this idea? And then you just pick yourself up and you just start putting the pieces back together. And that sort of crunchy middle is a really, fun time. And then you reach the next limit where you're like, this is pretty good. And the temptation is, we've been doing this forever. I want to just stop doing it. And I'm like, okay, cool. 80% done. The next 80% are going to be the hard part. Right. And it's like, let's just polish that last bit. And then you have to ask questions like, okay, we are being very rigid right now. Let's have fun. Games are fun. What is the dumbest idea you can think of to put into this game? And sometimes someone will say something and you're like, yeah, that's not going to work. But, okay, now we're coming at it from this angle. We're not incrementally making the game better. We're like, let's attack it from a different direction and come up with sort of ridiculous things that are...
You're kind of making me want to be a games designer right now because it does sound quite fun.
Yeah. I mean, I'm talking about the fun parts. I'm also going to go in today and try to figure out why this PNG that I'm importing into tabletop simulators and giving me a transparent background.
Oh, that's fun as
Right?
well. I mean, there are people out there
Yeah,
watching.
no, it's not.
um,
And I'm going to be looking at spreadsheets. I'm going to say, oh, this game's working, but I have 43 cards, which is not a full deck or a half deck. And do I want to add cards or take cards away? And how does this fit in the box? And there was an extensive discussion today about the draft on vac trays and how you can put things in there to stack on so that there's finger holes so you can get the pieces out, but it doesn't increase the box width because then it won't fit on the factory line.
I mean, you say that like that's obviously like not the most fun bit, but that is the stuff I really appreciate when it comes to game. If someone's considered even the little things like that, like how you're going to get the cards out of a tray, that is already going to be like way better than. I'm already going to be excited by that game. So yeah, you're doing the good work.
Trying to. My favorite thing. I work. My wife and I work together, and she's the graphics and production for Restoration. One of the first games we did was a game called Indulgence, which, hey, there's a game I thought would have done better and would like
Indulgence.
to see do better. It's almost about to be going out of print. It's a trick-taking game. Not many people play them these days. If you like trick-taking game, we've got a few hundred left, and we're not going to reprint it.
Gonna write that down.
You get a lot of stuff in the box for $20. So even if you play the game a couple times, you can trip it for parts. But one of the things is we have punch board tokens for score. And punch boards are not perfect. When they go down the factory line, they're always off a little bit. We've all seen it where you've got money and the numbers are all like up and to the left or something. When Lindsay, my wife, laid out the punch board for that, she turned all the numbers to a different orientation. So when the punch board, no matter which way it went, they weren't all up to the left. Like one was up to the left and one was down to the right, and one was sideways. And so it all looked off, but it looked off in a different way where you sort of looked at it and said, oh, that was off 1 millimeter this direction. Like you knew it was off, but it didn't matter because nothing was perfectly centered, but it looked more organic, like you would just, like they were hand stamped and each one was a little bit off in a different way. Right. And the game is set in 16th century Italy, so they look like florins and they have slightly irregular edges, and so the edges are irregular in a different orientation on each one, and it looks handmade as opposed to machine made. So those are the little things that we try to put.
That's great.
No one notices consciously, but hopefully stuff I work on, or
but I guess
whether it's individual or restoration, has that.
That's amazing. No, genuinely think that those kind of decisions, those little kind of touches, they do get registered, even if it's not like fully consciously. They do get registered, and that's great. You mentioned about restoration games, and obviously that's a big part of what you do now. Resurrecting old games, bringing them to life anew, often with tweaked rules, added sort of modes. I know, for example, Return to Dark Tower, which is, am I right in thinking that's your latest?
Well, that was our latest Kickstarter. Yeah. In the middle of design and development. I actually have a burner phone here with the first alpha build of the real app, not the prototype app, that I'm going to start looking at this afternoon.
Cool.
That's coming along. Manufacturing's coming along. We're looking at materials and light, starting to get into sound design. So all of the design and development is happening on that, and it'll be out next year. We're still hoping first quarter, but the size of the project and the state of the world is likely to delay it a little bit. Our other thing is we put out a line of games last year we started called Unmatched, which is anyone battles anyone. So Bigfoot versus Robin Hood. And we have a new set coming out called Cobble and Fog, which is Victorian England. Sherlock Holmes versus Dracula versus Jekyll and Hyde versus the Invisible Man.
Yeah.
And we are actually, that will be out next week.
So
if you follow Restoration Games or me on Twitter, we're going to be sort of rolling that out in hopefully an exciting way in the next week or so.
Very excited about that. I mean, I actually only got Unmatched last year when I visited America, because I don't think I could get it when it was out here. One of the best decisions I made. It's such a fun, tense game for 2 players. I know you can play it with 4 players as well, but I've only ever really played it with 2, and it's fantastic. It's such a fun game.
I really like the system, and we have 6, 7, 8, 9 figures out. We have a Jurassic Park set out in partnership with Mondo, Bruce Lee, Bigfoot versus Robin Hood, Battle Legends Volume 1. Then we'll have Cobble and Fog. We have Buffy the Vampire Slayer coming out later, another Jurassic Park, and then a few unannounced ones that we're working on. So we're hoping by the end of 2021 to have 30, 40, 45 different fighters
Oh
and
my gosh, there's
pairings
so
and
many.
tweaks that you can.
So there's a couple of questions. I want to try and get these in because they are very interesting to me. Let's talk about quickly working with older games. Obviously, that's the restoration games kind of MO. Are you worried at some point that you will run out of games that can be salvaged? Because there's only so many games that you can look back and go like, because I read on your website you have like a tick box of games that will satisfy all three before they can sort of be considered to be made.
Sure, it's our own definition
Yeah.
that we can bring. Yes, there is a concern that the games that everyone really wants, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Return to Dark Towers, the Fireball Islands, there may be a limited amount of those. But something like Unmatched, which was based on a game that actually I had co-designed called Epic Duels in 2002, mm-hmm. which is achieving success, there are thousands of those games.
Yeah.
And if we really say, hey, the barrel's dry, roll up shop and do something else.
Wow.
But I don't expect that to happen. I feel like we're still growing and we still have we have too much to do right now. It's not like it's not enough. And there are plenty of games on our list and in development that we can get
playing
to.
A bit of like fortune telling. Let's say in 20 years you're still designing games, you're still running restoration games. Do you ever see yourself picking up a Rob Daviau title that
I did. Unmatched was Epic Duels. I've already done that. In 20 years, I'll be 70. Please don't tell me I'm actively running a company at 70.
Hey, if it's going really well and you feel enjoying it, you could still be doing that. That's exciting.
I would love to be doing it. I'd be like the emeritus guy who comes in like, what are you kids cooking up in here? And the kids are like 45 or something like that, right?
Another question, and it's slightly related to Unmatched. Working with licensed IPs, is that more difficult? I imagine it would be because there's more people in the conversation.
Yeah, there are parts that are more difficult. Licensors can be very chill, or they can be very particular about things that you wouldn't expect. But I've been working on licensed games since my first game at Hasbro was Looney Tunes Monopoly in 1998. I've dealt with Star Wars, Harry Potter, and Marvel, and a whole bunch of stuff. So you kind of know going in what questions asked. You can still be surprised. But on the other hand, for all the, I don't even want to call them negatives, for all the constraints that can come there, there's also wonderful constraints of, if I'm doing a Star Wars game, I know who the characters are, I know who the good guys are, I know who the bad guys are, I know what the plot's supposed to be, I've got setting. You're just like, how do we take this and do something interesting? And it takes away a lot of work. As well.
So it's kind of cool because I know you work, I know your sort of background a little bit. So I guess you are the master of working with IPs, surely, like having done it for a long, long time.
Yeah, I don't know, a grandmaster or something. What was I before? Legendary. I dual class in game design, licensed game design.
Is there a license you would like to bring in that you haven't worked on yet?
Yeah, there's probably a few, but I don't necessarily talk about them in public because we might be working on them behind the scenes. But the list I just said, I've been very fortunate to work on a lot of childhood or adult licenses that I have tremendously enjoyed. And so I like what I'm working on now, and sometimes like, oh, that would be fun to do. And then I'll think of weird stuff, like there was a TV show called Battle of the Planets that was on in the late 70s, early 80s. It was a Japanese import cartoon I saw as a kid. I'm like, I love that show, and I should do a game about it. I haven't watched it in
just from
38 years. I have no idea if it's any good or would be. And I'm like, part of me is like, maybe it's just a nice childhood memory. Right. And I don't make it into a job. You start to make stuff into a job and then you're like, oh, I got to do this. And then it's work. Maybe it just lives over there as like a nice memory.
Yeah, fair enough. So I didn't mention this, but obviously it's kind of a staple of the show for anyone who's watching. But we tend to do a bit of a game with our guest being the Giggle. So this is the game. And I've just a very quick game for you because I'm very aware we're short on time. But this game is called Wait a Minute, but the wait is spelt like WEIGHT. Works very well. If you don't see the title, I'm kidding. So this game is based on games that you've designed, okay? So Board Game Geek has a weighting system for each of their games. So I'm going to just quickly challenge you on, is I've picked 5 pairs of games, and I just want you to tell me what you think the heaviest weighted game of the 2 is, and we'll see how many you get right out of 5. So it's a very...
And is one of them mine?
They're all yours, I believe.
Oh, so I'm going to compare games I've designed against each other.
So this will be quite interesting.
I expect to do horribly on this, but I enjoy the process.
Well, I've tried to make it so that the earlier ones are easier. So at least there's hope they
Okay,
can
all
get a
right.
couple of them.
Let's have a
All
gimme
right.
here. Let's
Okay.
an early win, so I feel engaged in the
Okay.
game.
So again, this is just based on the Board Game Geek, so you might feel differently, but this will be interesting, I think. Anyway, so
And the weighting goes from 1 to 5,
one
right?
to
But
five,
it's a lot
yes.
of
Yeah.
1 to 5, and there's a lot of decimals in there.
Yes. Oh,
Right?
it's a
Everything's like
2
2.4 to
2 decimal places. So
yeah, 2 point
yeah,
decimals. So I'm dealing with a scale from
I
1 to
don't
1,000.
I
Or
don't
something
expect
like
you
that.
to guess them correctly.
Oh
Specifically. You just
no!
need to tell me which one is heavier according to the Board Game
Okay.
Geek crowd. All right. So the first games are, and again, I hope this is right. Risk 2210 AD versus Seafall.
That's not an easy one.
I say easy. I'm talking about the differences between the numbers.
Yeah, no, I would say Seafall is weighted as heavier.
Okay, in that case, you are correct. So you have
Hey!
one on the board. One on the board for you there.
Okay.
Okay, so the second pairing. I want to make sure I get this right because I don't want to make sure that I am not giving one that's too far away. Okay, so let's do the next one is. This is quite a good one. Pandemic Legacy Season 1 versus Pandemic Legacy Season 2.
Season 2 is heavier.
Season 2 is heavier? Correct.
Yeah.
I actually tell you.
Yeah, and if it's not weighted that way, it should
Yeah.
be.
Well,
yeah.
the audience agrees. So, yeah, that's correct.
That is our crunchy middle chapter. Season 3 is closer to Season 1.
So it'll go like that.
Just in terms of we wanted a meaty, middle, dark chapter.
People are already invested if they're in the second one, so they can handle a bit more of it, basically. Cool.
Yeah.
All right, so the third one, we've got Unmatched Volume 1. That's just using that as the base one. Versus Cthulhu Death May Die.
Death May Die should be a lot heavier.
It is heavier, but it's not a lot heavier, you know? It's only 0.34, which isn't huge, but it's, you know...
It's like a milli heavy or something like that. Yeah. I am surprised by that.
Yeah, I was surprised as well.
Done both, but cool.
The next one is we've got Mountains of Madness versus Ultimate Werewolf Legacy.
Those are both pretty light, I would think.
I can confirm tonight afterwards.
I'm going to say Ultimate Werewolf Legacy is harder to play because you need a good moderator. But I would think Mountains of Madness is weightier.
So Mountains of Madness, you say, is the heavier one?
Sure.
Incorrect, I'm afraid. They put Ultimate Werewolf Legacy as slightly heavier.
That's fine. I agree with that because I think it's heavier because... but it's heavier for one person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe
the moderator, and everyone else just has to kind of go along with stuff.
That's fair. But anyway, you're still 3 out of 5. You see if you can get 4. This is the toughest one because the smallest difference between these. So this is going to be very tough. But the games are Fireball Island versus Stop Thief.
Well, I can tell you, I want Stop Thief to be heavier because I designed both and I planned it that way. So I'm picking Stop Thief.
So you say Stop Thief is the heavier one. That is correct. Yeah. And do you know how much heavier it was?
0.08.
Less.
Wow, really? It's basically a tie.
0.01. So
0.01. It's kind of, as I was talking, I'm like, oh no, if you use all the expansions on Fireball Island, that could be heavier, and there are a few things, and Stop Thief does have the phone to help you. But in my head, Fireball Island is lighter because I've seen 3-year-olds just play with it, and 5-year-olds flip marbles and play Portal. It's one that you can play with a younger child, just not by the rules, but it's still entertaining. Whereas Stop Thief, if you don't play by the rules,
you're kind of lost.
You can't really play it. So Fireball Island downgrades to be a playset, which we did on purpose. Obviously, there's marbles, people, choke hazards, but I have just seen set it up for like a 4-year-old, and they'll spend like 2 hours.
I've seen marbles. We had at the board game cafe that I work at, and people just set it up. And you can see, like, it's a very visual game. Like, I can totally see that. Anyway, I know you're running low on time, so I just wanted to give you a quick chance. Unfortunately, because there were some issues with the video stream, it looks like, I don't know if we didn't have time for the questions, unfortunately, for the audience questions. But I wanted to give you a chance to shout out for yourself, like games that are coming up, or anything you want people to know about you.
Well, there's really 2 things on the near horizon. Cobble and Fog from Restoration Games, which I mentioned, is having its debut next week. And then a little less than 2 weeks on June 18th, an expansion I wrote for Detective, the Portal Games Ignacy game. Dig Deeper is coming out. I just sort of did my final pass through the website. and that looks like it's coming together. It's great. The game's set in 1977, so is the website. So
Very exciting. Very exciting. Well, listen, thank you so much for joining us. I just want to do a quick plug for anyone who's watching, but obviously I run this channel, do Tea and Chit Chats live, mostly every Tuesdays and Fridays, with some board game playthroughs and video game playthroughs on the channel as well. So if you aren't following, please do. There's a little button just up there which allows you to follow for free. And if you do want to subscribe or donate or anything like that, as I said at the beginning of the video, I am fundraising for all Black Lives Matter movements, charities, and stuff. So that's kind of my thing all throughout June. So please consider subscribing if you're able to. Listen, thank you so much for joining me. I know you've got a meeting to get off to, so we'll end the stream there.
Yeah, it's fine. If you had any questions that I didn't answer, you can just at me on Twitter, and I'll do my best if it can be a short, succinct answer. It's at Rob Daviau. I leave it to you to figure out how to spell it.
If you can get it, then you've earned the right to ask him a question.
Yeah, I've earned the right to ask a question, yeah.
Listen, thank you so much again. It was a pleasure talking to you. Enjoy the rest of your day, and until the next time, take care.
All right, see ya.
Bye.